Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's been the fourth and final day of the Brexit challenge in the Supreme Court. The cases have now been concluded, the final submissions made, and we've heard from all of the interested parties. Now we're waiting for the judgment from the 11 justices. Will they or won't they decide that the government can trigger Article 50 and begin the process of exiting the European Union without a vote in Parliament? Watching it all has been our legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg, but let's begin by listening to the lawyer for the Welsh Government.
Where there is no existing prerogative power, no question of whether Parliament has abrogated or revived the power arises. And this is elementary. A child of 6, with respect, could understand this point. If...
That's very well put.
My Lord, I say a child of 6 could understand this point because if you tell a child it can't go out and play in the garden, but it can play in the house, it has no power, the analogue, to going out in the garden. If you haven't got a particular power to do something, because to do so would violate a prior constraint, you simply don't have the prerogative power. So to accept that there is a treaty-making power does not mean that there is a treaty-making power to dispense with laws, or to subvert statutory schemes, or to crucify human rights.
So, Joshua, a child of 6 can understand it, but can you explain it to us anyway?
It was a pretty robust statement from Richard Gordon, wasn't it, for the Welsh Government. You remember all this started when the government said it could use these prerogative powers, these inherent executive powers, and it didn't need an Act of Parliament. Well, the problem was that these powers are said to have been abrogated, diminished, knocked back, reduced when the UK joined what is now the EU in 1972. But, says the government, when we had the Referendum Act last year, that suddenly revived this prerogative power because it was clear that Parliament intended there to be a power for the government to trigger Brexit if the voters decided that was the way they wanted to go. And what Richard Gordon is saying is, well, that's not true. You can't do that. What he's saying is, if there was no power, because in the first place, even before then, you can't suddenly revive it. And that's what he's saying a child of 6 could understand. The Lord Newberger, who's 68, didn't quite take to that, I think.
Now, we also heard from other claimants siding with Gina Miller. She's the woman who originally brought the case. Let's hear from their lawyer.
There is no prerogative power to change the law. There is nothing to abrogate. Mr Eady's submissions on the De Keyser principle are, as Mr Gordon suggested, in effect to say that the government can change the constitution in a radical way because Parliament has never said that it can't. Or to put it at a perhaps more facetious level, we are on the last day of the case, Mr Eady's submissions are the equivalent of arguing that because none of the attempts to catch the Loch Ness Monster have succeeded, the Loch Ness Monster still roves free.
Now, Helen Mountfield QC was representing a crowd-funded group called the People's Challenge. Joshua, who are they and what was the point she was making?
They are a group of concerned EU citizens. They are people from different countries, from England, from Wales, from Scotland, from Northern Ireland, one from Gibraltar, and they're worried that they will lose their status as EU citizens if the UK leaves the EU. That's their concern, and her concern, as expressed in that remark about the Loch Ness Monster, was this is all about this, as somebody called it on Twitter today, the sound of silence. This is all about what we can infer from the fact that there's nothing in the 2015 Act, or indeed in the earlier acts, about this prerogative that we've been hunting for all this week. And she's saying, well, you know, the fact that it hasn't been caught doesn't necessarily mean it's there. It might mean it's not there, and that, of course, is what she's arguing.
Now, we also heard from some other lawyers fighting on behalf of people from other European countries who worry that they may have to leave the UK after Brexit. Let's hear what they had to say.
This case is not hard. Some people are trying to make it very, very hard. The reason why they're trying to make it very hard and putting their counsel in the position of contortions, where they're saying one thing one minute and another thing the next, is because nobody ever thought that the 2015 Act was ever intended to confer any prerogative power at all. And the one reason for that may be this. It's a political point made by those who voted leave, is that nobody ever thought that there was going to be a leave vote.
No one ever thought there would be a leave vote. That is the heart of it, really, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, that must be the truth as to why there's nothing in the 2015 Act as to the consequences of a leave vote, because David Cameron, the Prime Minister, didn't even want to contemplate that there would be a leave vote, and he certainly didn't want to spell it out in legislation. That's why we've spent the whole of this week speculating on what Parliament's silence means. We all know what Parliament's silence means. As Manjit Gill said, it was political. He is very concerned about his clients. They're not named, but they include children, they include people from other European countries, and they fear that they're going to be kicked out of the United Kingdom if the UK leaves the EU.
Thanks, Joshua. So, to close day 4, the UK government's lawyer James Eadie responded to what the other side had been arguing. Let's hear some of what he had to say.
Should have a copy of the motions before yes. on your desk. And, my lord, you see the resolution, the nature of the resolution, and you see, in effect, that it indicates the view of the House. You see the majorities.
Yes, yes.
And you see, in particular, the call from the House of Commons on the government, final line, to invoke Article 50 by the 31st of March 2017.
Yes.
And we respectfully submit that that is highly significant. It provides the sharpest of focuses. No doubt it isn't legally binding, but that doesn't mean it isn't legally relevant. It provides the sharpest of focuses on the nature of the issues now in play, because Parliament has given, or the House of Commons at least has given, specific approval to the government to give that notice, and indeed has called on them to do so by a particular date. And it is impossible, we respectfully submit, in those circumstances, to pray and aid broad considerations of the kind my learned friend Mr. Chambers urged upon you about parliamentary sovereignty. Parliament has indicated its view and has done so clearly, and has done so...
Well, the House of Commons.
The House of Commons, exactly.
But the Queen in Parliament has not.
The Queen, well, because the House of Lords have not. This is
well,
a House of Commons resolution.
No, the Queen in Parliament has not. There is no statute.
Joshua, can you explain what is the Queen in Parliament?
Lord Neuberger is referring to legislation which has to be approved by the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and then formally the Queen gives her assent, always she does. Now that is legislation. That's passed by both Houses of Parliament. And I'm sure accidentally, James Eadie slipped into referring to what Parliament had done, but what he was actually referring to was motions put and resolutions passed by the House of Commons, which is only one House of Parliament. And the point being put to him by the court is that a motion passed by the Commons is not law. And therefore, when he was trying to say, well, look, you know, Parliament's already said it supports the idea of Brexit in accordance with the Prime Minister's timetable, and therefore perhaps we don't even need this legislation. What the judges were saying to him was, hang on, you haven't got the legislation, which is what Gina Miller and her lawyers are saying you need. You're far from it. Certainly you've got a sign that legislation might well be approved because there's clearly a majority in the House of Commons for Brexit on whatever terms we're going to get. But that's entirely different from legislation. And what the judges went on to say to him was, look, if we're against you on your main argument about the prerogative, this isn't really going to help you, is it, this motion in the House of Commons? And he had to concede the answer to that was yes.
Yeah, quite an interesting exchange there. Now, unusually, there were some final words from Lord Neuberger, who, of course, is the President of the Supreme Court. Let's listen in.
It bears repeating that we are not being asked to overturn the result of the EU referendum. The ultimate question in this case concerns the process by which that result can lawfully be brought into effect. As we have heard, that question raises important constitutional issues, and we will now take time to ensure that the many arguments which have been presented to us orally and in writing are given full and proper consideration. Having said that, we appreciate that this case should be resolved as quickly as possible. and we will do our best to achieve that. Thank you again, everybody. The court is now adjourned.
Well, there were Lord Neuberger's final words. What are your final thoughts, Joshua?
Well, he stressed at the end, unusually, just as he did at the beginning, unusually, that this case is about law, not politics. We're not talking about whether Brexit is a good thing or not. We're talking about what legal processes are required for the Prime Minister to give notice under Article 50. They're going away to think about it. I think they begin by setting out drafts of what they might say in their judgment. Probably each of the 11 justices will do that. They circulate these drafts by email. They have meetings, they have discussions. But given that probably most of them are too busy to get really down to the heavy work of going through all this until the Christmas New Year break, I suspect it'll be January before they can really try and get some consensus. And that, I think, is what Lord Neuberger will want. He will want to get at least one majority decision which as many of the justices as possible can subscribe to, giving their view of what should happen.
Thank you, Joshua, for your thoughts on the final day at the Supreme Court. Now, we have heard in depth from both sides in this landmark court case. Now it's the judges who must decide who wins this historical constitutional Brexit challenge. You'll have to wait until January for the judgment, but we'll bring you it, of course, live on Sky News. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
I've been getting away with it all my